Hello bicycle touring friends, welcome to episode number 70 of Bicycle Touring Talk. This episode is part of a series, Bicycle Tour Canada Coast to Coast. All of the videos can be found in the playlist by that name in case you'd like to see a particular part of the route. I am George Schlackhig,
the one and only,
and I do my best to describe the route I took across Canada besides sharing the adventures I came across. Last week's episode left off at the Bocalino Motel right on Crawford Bay. The next morning, Barbara and I found a place to have breakfast together right next to the ferry terminal. We then agreed to meet in Creston, about 80 kilometers down the way along Kootenay Lake. For Barbara, this was going to be a 1-hour ride. She was then going to have time to visit the town while I was still working my way through the rolling hills along the lake. The ride started out really good, which was in part because I had the relatively narrow road to myself, except for a few minutes every half hour or so. Ferry traffic.
So I'm on a road here that is goes from Crawford Bay to Creston. It starts at the ferry, so traffic is very light at the moment. But there was like 2-3 cars in a row just a minute ago, so I'm suspecting that ferry traffic might come, so I pulled over here and let them pass, you know, because there's only so many cars on one ferry, and once they pass me, I'm by myself, you know, so it's a really good way of riding.
The scenery was beautiful for the most part, and the ride, while moderately challenging due to many shorter climbs, was really enjoyable. There were a lot of things to see. A house built entirely of glass bottles comes to mind. I stopped at a little store to get some ice cream. There were plenty of places that offered camping and cabins right on the lake, beach resorts and all. This would have been an area to spend more time at least another rest day or something like that, for example. I made a stop at Kuskonook Harbor to have a look around, eat lunch and use the outhouse. The further along the road I got, the more scary the ride became because traffic was now no longer just from the ferry. Some of the trucks and campers passed way too close, which is what tends to happen when the highway does not have a wide enough shoulder to safely accommodate a bicycle. Again, I was wishing for a well-maintained trail apart from the highway. Overall, the ride to Creston was probably one of the most scenic ones. There are actually spots from where you can see the town of Nelson because the road goes along the shore and Nelson is just on the other side. After passing Kootenay Lake, there's Duck Lake, which is much smaller. Then suddenly there's a valley with green fields. That's where I stopped at this Lions Club canopy to enjoy the view for a few minutes because I knew that I was nearing Creston and this ride would be over. One of the most challenging climbs that day was just before arriving in town, passing Windell. I met up with Barbara at the local Tim Hortons and we had coffee. We also made a reservation at the Paradise Campground. Afterwards, we set up our tent there for the night and then cooked supper at the campsite. When the journey continued the next morning, we first had breakfast together at a local restaurant. Then we went our separate ways once again. The ride now continued on Highway 3. This made a difference. The scenery was still nice, but there were sections where it wasn't really that spectacular. The shoulder was now wider, but traffic was also heavier, and with that came some drivers who were less than considerate toward others, and cyclists in particular.
Anybody who gets a driver's license should not only have to prove that they are able to operate a car safely, but they should also have a psychological assessment. When there's oncoming traffic, whether it's a truck, a car, or a bicycle on the shoulder, you do not pass anybody else.
It was on this stretch that I also passed a sign announcing a different time zone. Mountain time, the same one as in Alberta. Finally, a sign that I had already covered considerable distance on this tour. Memorable stops for me were at an ice cream place called Two Scoop Steve's and in the village of Moyi, where I bought some snacks and consumed them on the steps of an old fire hall. After Moyi, the ride got scenic again because of Kootenay Lake to my left. There was a provincial park at the far end of it, and it almost seemed like this would have been a perfect spot to camp. The rest of the ride to Cranbrook was pleasant, but not spectacular. Once again, Barbara and I met up at Tim Hortons and booked a campsite through their Wi-Fi. The campground was right in town, and I can't remember its name. If you know it, feel free to mention it in a comment below. For some reason, this campground does not show up on Google Maps. I think we had trouble locating it for that reason. After my 108-kilometer ride that day, we did not do much in the evening. Next to our spot, however, were now 2 touring bikes parked, which of course piqued my curiosity. We only got to meet the 2 ladies the next morning. Both were probably past or close to retirement age, but their mission was similar to my own: cycle across Canada. It just proves that you can do this tour regardless of age. But a decent fitness level is definitely essential, which does not mean you need to be very athletic at all. After packing up the campsite, Barbara and I headed to Tim Hortons for breakfast. I think this was where it became clear to me how deficient nutritionally fast food can be. This is a real photo of a breakfast sandwich. If I showed you the image that was on the menu, you wouldn't believe it was the same item. If you'd like to get my take on nutrition while on an extended bicycle tour, please make sure you're subscribed because there'll be a video about that soon. Once again, Barbara and I kissed goodbye to meet up again later in the day, and once again my ride was over 100 kilometers. The destination was Fairmont Hot Springs. We were both looking forward to bathing in the hot springs. The ride started out with 2 options. The way I ended up taking was slightly longer via Fort Steele. In the big picture, this didn't make a difference, and it was probably a bit flatter. It was another long day on the road in beautiful weather. I remember eating lunch at a lakeside rest area near Wausa Provincial Park. Later, I passed a statue of Chief Skookumchuck and the pulp mill named after him. Also memorable was the view of Columbia Lake from a rest area, and then the Dutch Creek hoodoos. Barbara had arranged a campsite for us at the Spruce Grove campground. It was probably one of the nicest campsites of the trip, and it would be the last one we'd share for a while. By that time, I had cycled 10 days without a complete rest day. Fatigue was building up, but that's where the Fairmont Hot Springs were so good. We went there before shutting down for the night. The following day, we were once again traveling together and apart. The plan was to meet up at Radium Hot Springs and dip in hot springs once more before we tried to camp up in the mountains in Kootenay National Park. Unfortunately, the camping facilities in that park were still closed, only to open up later at the end of June for the season. Instead, I got soaked to the bone in a storm so strong that it literally blew me uphill. Had 2 bear encounters and ended up spending a night in Barbara's car. More details on that in the next episode. As always, I sincerely hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, let the algorithm know by clicking the like button. It helps me a great deal. So thank you for that, and I'll see you soon.